Welcome to this presentation on water quality. It's a jointly sponsored presentation between the Guilford Conservation Commission and Guilford Free Library. So thank you, Danielle, for the room and getting everything set up. This is great, the screen and everything, so thank you. My name is Kendra Houston. I'm a member of the Guilford Conservation Commission, and I just want to let everybody know this is all being recorded for GCTV for viewing at a later date. And I'd like to introduce our other conservation members that are here tonight. We have some that are absent, but Joe Nugent right here in front, Jeff Spooner over there, Patricia Di Leonardo. So, and our chair, Doug Clark, is out of town, and we've got Scott Williams and both Kevin McGee are at other had to be at other town meetings. So anyway, so what we've got is, I just want to bring you up to date and to tell you, just to remind everybody, the Conservation Commission is charged with the development, conservation, supervision, and regulation of natural resources, including water resources within the territorial limits of Guilford. So that's our charges and duties. We've got two upcoming events that I'd like to tell you about. The first one is Saturday, April 12th. It's going to be an invasive plant walk and talk, so it's not a hike, it's a nice easy walk and talk. And it's going to be at Timberlands Preserve, and we've got maps over there, and it'll be starting at the North Madison Road trailhead. So you'll be able to see on the map where that is. And it'll run from 10 a.m. till noon. And I think more information about that will be on the town, hopefully on the town events calendar, and also be published for everybody. So, also to let you know, our speaker, Dr. Mike Dietz, has information over there on his water quality talk, and we have trail maps in addition to the Timberlands Preserve. Feel free to take any and all that you want. We've got on May 4th, that's Sunday, from 1 to 4 on the Guilford Green, we're going to have an Earth Day celebration, and it's going to be co-sponsored with Guilford Conservation Commission and the Guilford Sustainable Task Force, of which there are many members here tonight. So we're really looking forward to this event. Lots of people come out, lots of organizations are there. Very educational event, so hopefully the weather will hold for us. Last year it was very windy and very cold. So this year we're hoping for lots of sun and no wind at all. So on that note, I'd like to take a few minutes to introduce Dr. Mike Dietz. I'm going to say that he earned his PhD in Natural Resources Management and in Engineering, focusing on water resources from UConn. I think it says it right up here, he's an extension educator at UConn, where he's also a joint faculty member, and UConn's Department of Natural Resources and the Environment. He directs the Connecticut Institute of Water Resources and is part of the Center for Land Use Education Research, and more information on that is over there. So on that note, I'd like to introduce Mike Dietz. Welcome.
Maybe when I get through the presentation, it's pretty flat.
Yes.
I got to run those class, all right? So thank you very much, Kendra, for the nice introduction. If you have questions throughout the talk tonight, please feel free to raise your hand and ask. This is a nice small group, so it makes it fun for me to have it be a little more intimate conversation. So don't be afraid to ask if you have a question. So just a little bit about where we're going tonight. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a background on water resource issues. So please don't feel insulted if you know this stuff already. This is just to make sure everybody understands why I'm talking about some of the other things I'm talking about, some of the reasons behind it. Then I will talk about some things you can do to protect your health related to water, mainly one thing, and then several other things you can do to protect health of local water. So that's where we're headed. So here's the background stuff. And if my daughter were here, she would be rolling her eyes saying, we learned about this stuff in grade school, why are you talking about it? Because it's easy to forget. I'm a water guy, and when it's raining outside, I walk out the door, I'm not thinking about the water cycle and how all this stuff is going on all the time around me. I'm just thinking about when it's raining, I need to get out. Or the situation that we're in, it's raining and I'm happy it's raining because we are still in drought in much of the state. Some of you are aware of that. So we are actually quite behind on our water. And if we don't pick up on that in the next few weeks to month, that could be quite problematic when we get into the summer growing season. So I didn't mean to get off on that tangent, but since I started talking about it, I decided to go down there. The main thing that I'm going to talk about tonight in relation to this water cycle is right here, is where the precipitation hits the landscape. So this is a part of the water cycle that we have had a big impact on as humans. So the other things that are happening here, the evaporation from our oceans, that is also changing as a result of our actions on this planet. The evapotranspiration, or the water that the plants, the trees, take out of the ground and send up back into the atmosphere, that is being affected by our increased temperatures that we have. So there are lots of changes that are taking place, but this is a big one that we'll focus on here tonight. So here's a little weird looking graph, and I'm going to ask you a question because I'm a teacher and this is what I like to do with my students. So how many inches of rain do we get, precipitation, not just rain, so rain and snow, do we get in an average year here in New York? The Conservation Commission members cannot answer, which you probably Are you on the Conservation Commission? All right, you get the prize for this one. So it's 48 inches, very close. So of that 48 inches, about half of it, 20, so 4 feet, 2 feet of that water that falls on our state in an average year goes back up to the atmosphere as evapotranspiration. All of our trees that are in vegetation that's pulling that water from the ground and direct evaporation from the ground. It's a huge number. And most of that is happening during the growing season when the temperatures are high. So it's a surprisingly high amount of water. Where does the rest of that water go? 2 feet of it go back up to the atmosphere. Where do the other 2 feet go? Somebody's paying attention. The rest run off and go into the sound, basically, if you're here, or the other parts of the state. That water will go into local streams and rivers. Some of it will go directly off the surface and run into the river. The rest of that water, if it doesn't get taken up by the vegetation, will move through the soil and the groundwater and enter the streams as base flow. So that's another component of the water cycle. Make sense? Okay. Now, here's another question. I didn't think you were going to have to answer some of the questions tonight. How many of you live in a watershed? You are correct. Okay, if you, and most of the time, I can see that you're all pretty savvy here. Most of the time when I ask this question, only a couple people will answer. So usually when people think about a watershed, they will say, I don't live in a watershed because I don't see a public water supply watershed sign. That's what people think of as watersheds. But in reality, we all live in a watershed, as many of you know. So a watershed is just an area of land that drains to an outlet, to a point on a stream. So a watershed could be very small. If you have a stream that goes through your backyard, we could figure out how much land drains to that stream. It might be, a quarter of an acre, something like that. Or very close to where you are here, we could go to the Connecticut River, and we could say, what is the watershed of that? That goes all the way up to our 51st state. That's as political as I'm going to get to. You can take that whatever way you want to take it. So, but that's an enormous watershed. We could look at the Mississippi River, and that has an even bigger watershed in this whole breadbasket of our country. So the point is, it's where you put the point. I didn't mean to say that. That is how a watershed is defined. So here's just a little useful tool for you if you're curious about your watersheds in your area. You can go to this tool that's made by EPA. It's called How's My Waterway? You don't have to worry about this big link here. If you just type that into Google, it'll take you right to it. So what that will do, you can put your address in, and it will pull up the local watersheds that are near your house, and it'll show you the stream segments that are on there, and you can see if it's healthy or if it's impaired for something. And if you click on that, it'll give you more information about each of those segments. So it's a neat tool that just helps you learn a little bit more about what some of the issues might be in the waters near your home. So mostly what people think of as water pollution is what we call point source pollution. So this is something that comes out of a pipe that looks bad or smells bad. Things like raw sewage coming from our cities, things like chemicals and other unregulated things that were going into the water. Up until not too long ago in our country, that really was the biggest source of water pollution. So until the early 1970s, the point sources of pollution were causing the biggest problems. So that was causing issues like this, having rivers catch on fire. This is the Cuyahoga River, where it caught fire multiple times throughout its history in the 50s and 60s. The one that captured the most attention nationwide was in the late 1960s. So we don't have rivers catching fire in this country anymore, fortunately. And that was because of PL 92-500, which was the Clean Water Act, the Water Pollution Control Amendments of 1972. There were other water pollution control acts before this, but this was the big one. It was really it came forth as a grassroots effort from people saying this is enough, enough is enough. We can't access our water is so polluted, we can't fish in it, we can't swim in it, it's causing us health issues. So enough of an outcry happened that the politicians finally did something about it and created the Clean Water Act and the EPA, and also the Clean Air Act actually happened around the same time. So 1972 is a very good year, happened to be the year I was born. I'm looking for the odds, so thank you for giving me a couple of minutes. So I had a lot more hair when I was a young man there, seeing that picture. But all joking aside, as you are aware, we have had major improvements in the quality of our waters since 1970. And we can really point to that legislation, that regulation, and that is really what we have to thank. So that was passed by a bipartisan effort on both sides of Congress, both sides of the aisle. It's hard to imagine people working together in these days, but they did. And they accomplished something really critical for our country that has made our lives a lot better. But we're still left with some problems. So unfortunately, the point sources have been addressed in many ways, so they are permitted and controlled in many ways now. So what we're left with is what we call non-point pollution. So this is runoff from agricultural areas, so from large farms, and from urban areas, where the runoff comes from diffuse sources. It's not easy to say, okay, it's coming out of this pipe, this is where it has to be fixed. It's very difficult to figure out where this stuff is coming from. It's tough to identify and control. So really what the driver here has to do with impervious cover or development on the landscape. So this is just a little representation of what happens as we might go from an undeveloped watershed. So if you look at a small watershed in Connecticut, for example, it doesn't have any houses in it. You might expect to see a river or stream that looks like this. So we have nice tree cover over that. That keeps the water cool. It's good habitat for those species that like cool water. There's nice pool and ripple structure here. If you like to fish for trout, this would be your ideal trout stream. And the banks are in good condition. There's not a lot of erosion taking place. So that's what we would consider a healthy stream or river in this area. As we start to get a little more development on the landscape, some homes, some roads, we start to see changes in the rivers. So we have a lot of impervious cover, things like parking lots, roads, buildings that now drain to those rivers and streams. There's a lot more water that's coming in when it rains now as compared to before. So we start seeing things like the channels being lined with stone because they were eroding, although water was washing the banks away. There's no more vegetation along the banks. And we don't have that tree cover over the top anymore. Some changes that are taking place. As we get even further, this is an example from West Hartford, so even more dense development. We start seeing our streams have completely armored channels like this. This is actually a picture of Trout Brook in West Hartford. I don't think anybody's catching any trout in Trout Brook anymore. So this is actually what it looks like, and not a great place for aquatic life. And finally, at the far end of the spectrum, we have our very developed areas, our urban areas. So here is an example from Hartford. So this is a postcard from Bushnell Park. There's the state capitol. Date is 1905. I'm sure all of you have been to the park. You know the Soldiers and Sailors Arch. Have you seen the river that goes under the arch? What happened to the river? That's exactly what happened to it. They covered it over because of all the flooding that took place in the 1950s. That was primarily when it happened. So that river got buried underneath the city, and there it is. So as you would imagine, not great habitat for any kind of aquatic life. So this is really what's the consequences. This is what happens as we develop. If you look at it on a small scale, you might say, is it really that big of a deal? Right? So I come from a family, there was a blue collar family. My uncle has a construction business. He actually just retired from it. So he always says to me, it's just rainwater. We have very lively conversations at the holidays, as you might imagine. So what's the big deal? It's just rainwater washing off. It's not, how can it be that big of a problem? Let's just look at our little site where we're sitting right here tonight. So if we look at the building of the library and the main parking lot that is outside here, the area that's shaded in yellow there, it's 44,000 square feet of impervious cover. So when it rains, water cannot sink through it and get into the ground as it did when this site just had forest on it. If we get 1 inch of rain, 27,000 gallons of water are going to run off this little site. 27,000 gallons. You folks were talking with me about rain barrels when you came in. How many gallons are your rain barrels? About 55. 55 gallon, 55. How many rain barrels would it take to contain all that water? I can't count. Somebody can do the math if you want, but it's a lot. So where does that water go? If it's on the road, where does it go from the road?
Into storm drains.
Into storm drains. And the storm drains go to?
On the sound.
Here they will go directly to the sound most likely. The further inland you go, if you're not in one of our big cities like New Haven or Hartford or Bridgeport, all the runoff that goes into a pipe eventually will just go into a local stream or lake or river, untreated. So if we now add that up for our average year that we talked about before, 1.3 million gallons just off of this little parking lot and building. So now you get the sense of how much water this really is. Do this math if you go to New York City now and think about the trillions of gallons, just for that 1 inch of rainfall, the trillions of gallons that are going to come off of that site. That's just the quantity now that someone has to deal with, having the infrastructure to handle that and get it away from our living areas. That doesn't even begin to tackle the quality of that water, the things that it picks up along the way. So that's what we'll talk a little bit more about tonight. So it's a little far out of the holidays, but when I talk with the master gardeners, it's right after the holidays. I usually like to talk about this. We do get some good advice from movies about what not to dump in your storm drain. If anybody likes to watch Christmas Vacation, you know, Cousin Eddie, that's some great advice about what not to dump in your storm drain. All right, so all kidding aside, there are really things like what Cousin Eddie was putting into that storm drain that occasionally do come out of our stormwater systems. We were just discussing this with Joe at the beginning here. So for those of you who aren't aware of how this works, most of our old cities in the entire eastern part of our country have what's called a combined sewer system. So when these systems were built, the stormwater pipes were put into the sewer lines on purpose to keep it moving, to keep it flowing. Because when these cities were built in the mid to late 1800s, where did the sewage go? Into the nearest river, to the sound, wherever exactly. So they wanted that water, extra water, to keep it moving because they didn't want to have to send someone down in there to unblock the sewer. That's not a job I would have wanted. So what we're left with are the remnants of those systems in our cities. So Hartford, New Haven, Bridgeport, Stamford, I think is combined. I can't remember. But I know the big three are Groton, I can't remember either. But what we're left with is a city now where the sewage goes into a pipe and now goes to a wastewater treatment facility, because we have those now, and they do a pretty good job at managing all that sewage, treating it, and discharging mostly clean water right back into the nearest water. If we get a little bit of rain, it goes into that same system. They have the capacity in there to handle it a little bit. But if we get too much rain, they cannot handle all that extra water in the system. And so what happens in there are points in this system where if it gets to a certain level and they know they can't handle it, it goes to a discharge point, and this tasty elixir of raw sewage and stormwater gets discharged directly into the nearest water line. So this happens in Hartford, it happens in Springfield, Chicopee, Massachusetts, upstream of Hartford. So when this happens, they are required to notify Connecticut DEP about this. So there actually is a website you can track when there are combined sewer overflows. For all of the beaches along the coast where it's any kind of public swimming area, the Department of Public Health is required to test those waters to make sure that they're safe for swimming. So if you've tried to take your kids or your grandkids out to the beach in the summer, right after a big rainstorm and that beach was closed, this is why. So our big cities are actively trying to address this issue now. They're separating these systems. New Haven has been doing a lot of this. Hartford has been doing a lot of this. Hartford is drilling some giant tunnels. I was just talking with Joe about this before, to try to manage this combined sewer overflow temporarily and then send it to the plant after it's done, after the storm is done. But it's an enormous issue. It's enormously complex. There's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be fixed, and it costs money. And it's not a sexy issue. So some governor of a big city or a mayor of a big city, this is not the issue he's going to win his election by, talking about the combined sewer overflow problem. But it has affected many people's lives. There are people in Hartford that had raw sewage backing up in their basements when we got big storms. So it's a big issue. Okay, so hopefully I have not depressed you too much. You're ready to leave by this point. But it's important for me to at least convey a little bit of this stuff because it is the reality. This is what we're faced with now. And we may not be aware of it in most times unless it has directly affected you in some way. So I just want to let you see all the information that is out there at this point. So what can you do? So let's talk first about the thing that you can do to protect yourself from water you consume. So I was talking with, what was your name again? Denise. I was talking with Denise when she first came in about whether you have a private well versus city water. And it seems like a lot of people in town have private wells, a very small section of city water. So if you have your own private well, it was either an older shallow dug well, which was very common up until probably the early 1900s, or you have a drilled well that goes down into the bedrock. The shallow wells are definitely more vulnerable to contamination. That's why you cannot build a new house now and install just a shallow well. You're required to drill a well into the bedrock because the wells that go down into the bedrock have a steel casing that keeps out this water that's in the shallow groundwater in the soils. So that is, in theory, should protect you a little bit more from things that are going on the surface, like agriculture or industry or road salt, all those things. You can still buy a house that has a shallow well and still use that water. It's grandfathered in. But if you own a home that has a shallow well and you have not tested that well in any recent memory, I will ask you when you go home tonight to go to one of my links here. I don't make any money off of this, I promise you, and sign up for a water test. You can do this at a lab in the area, or you can reach out to us and you can. It's not super convenient because unless we're doing a workshop in the area, which we are not until early April, you have to bring the sample up to UConn. So it's probably more convenient for you to find a lab in your area and take the sample yourself, but you will pay about $310 to $320 for that sample. So this is the reason why I say this about the shallow well. Almost every shallow well we have tested has come up with bacteria in it. That is the most common contaminant that we find in the shallow or the bedrock wells. Overall, we've tested over 700 or 800 private wells as part of this recent project we're doing. And we found for about 1 in 3, 30%. So we've got 5, 6, let's say 15 people here. 5 of you in this room are going to have bacteria in your well.
Contact the Board of Health and we can direct you where to go to get samples done.
So the labs are, all the state certified labs are on this site, so that they may have another one
Well, they're local in Madison, there's,
okay, that's fine, that's great.
some of these, they will come out and take them. It's preferred that they come out and take the water samples. There's a certain way to take the samples.
Do they do the full potability suite, or is it just bacteria, do you know?
I believe they can do the full.
And they won't do it for free, I could say.
No, they don't do it. Nobody does
Get rid of it. So that's great, so if anybody is looking for the local source, Joe has that information. Yeah, go ahead.
How shallow is a shallow well?
That's a good question. Generally, I would say probably less than 20 feet. Anything deeper than that, it was drilled. Or if you have like a big cover and you can slide it off and you see something that's like this big around, that's a hand dug well. Any drilled well. In the 50s and 60s, sometimes they would bury the casing for the drilled well underneath a big concrete cover. So it looked like it was like a shallow well, kind of like the movie The Ring. Anybody that's seen the movie The Ring? So they go climbs out of the well. You're not horror movie fans. All right, sorry, a little scary. So if you slide that cover over and you see a steel casing in there, a small casing, that's a drilled well. But if you can look down and see water and the stone lining, that's definitely a dug well.
There'd be, I don't know if anybody in the room would know this, is there a way to look up how many homes in Guilford may have shallow wells?
There's no record of whether it's a shallow or drilled well. Yeah. There is a data layer that the Department of Public Health has that shows which parcels are served by city water versus private water, but they don't distinguish shallow versus drilled. You can look up the records with the town, like on an individual property basis, but I don't recommend that. It's a very time-consuming process. I mean, if it's just your own house, if you're looking broadly, it's going to be a pain to do. But if you're just looking for your own house, you can go, and it should be in your records in your home if it was drilled.
And one more question
Yeah.
about the well testing that you mentioned. So that first testing, you're saying you have to bring the sample up to UConn, but it's free.
Well, it's not. No, I didn't say that.
I remember you.
We had a grant that covered most of the costs, and we were just charging $50. Now we're charging $200. It's still a little better than the $300, but unfortunately it's not free. We ran out of the grant funding. It's unfortunate. We're trying to get more. So if you can wait till April, there will be a one that we're doing in Old Saybrook. There's going to be a collection event. There's a birthday celebration there, and then there'll be a collection event the week after that. In the meantime, if you want it before then, you can contact me. I can mail you a kit, and you can drive it up to us.
If we did a collection event in Guilford, is that something that you would support regularly? Like, would we do a collection event and
If you had enough people that wanted to do this, if you could organize that end down here, I'd be happy to work with you. Yep. Yep, just reach out to me, my emails, yeah, go ahead.
if you learn that you're one in 30, you've got bacteria, what's your next move?
Your next move is to bleach the well. And so we provide you instructions on how to do that from the Department of Public Health. And it basically just chlorinates the system, and the water will then you run it through your entire system in your house also, let it sit for a few hours, 4 to 6 hours, and then flush it out. And then we offer a free retest just for bacteria. Most of the time that takes care of it, but there are still people where there's a persistent issue, and we recommend them putting in a UV light to treat the water.
We had that where we used to live up in Collin, and we had the repeat problem. And then finally somebody came, an old timer came and looked at the big pipe that was around it,
Yep.
and he said, "Oh, there's some dead snakes in there."
It happens. We've had people that had like 4 squirrels end up in the well, like
It wasn't just runoff,
mice.
land.
Yes, that definitely happens. Yep, it's unfortunate. Okay. Oh, sorry, I'm straying over too far. You let me fix it. Okay. Next, if many of you, obviously, if you have a well, you also have a septic system, or even some people mentioned or have septic even though they have city water. So if you're not aware of how your septic tank works, there is a tank where those solids accumulate, And what will go out to the leaching field is only supposed to be liquid. So it will go out and that will sink down through the layers of soil where it actively breaks down. Many of the things like nitrates and phosphates are broken down or you're held by the soil or converted to gas. So that by the time it gets down all the way through the soil and goes down into the bedrock, and by the time it moves over to your neighbor's well, it's in theory okay to drink. Not joking. This is how it works.
Takes a long time.
So it takes some time. It takes some, but in many places, we don't have a lot of soil above the bedrock here. It's very shallow, 12 to 20 feet, really. And then you hit the bedrock, sometimes even shallower. And then you can hit a fracture in that bedrock and you don't know. So we're required to be 75 feet away. That's the regulation now, but weird things can happen, especially if we have high groundwater that comes up when in flooding areas, especially this town where you're very close to sea level here. I'm sure you have persistent problems with that. So that can cause those kind of issues as well. So the main thing you can do here is to take care of your septic system, make sure it's functioning properly. So what you don't want to do, actually I should go back to this. What you don't want to do is neglect it and just pretend it doesn't exist. Because if the solids accumulate too far in here and get over into this side, then the solids start to go out into the fields and it clogs everything up. And then you have to call my uncle. My uncle has retired and has a couple of nice boats and a couple of houses because he makes a lot of money off of building houses and putting in septic systems. I'm not in the direct line of inheritance, unfortunately. I chose to go into academia instead of going into construction fields. But here we are.
Usually the only replacement parts of the subterranean system is a leaching field. Usually the tank doesn't fail.
You can replace the tank though.
Yeah, you can.
Yes,
But normally it's the leaching field that becomes contaminated where solids end up
that's true.
plugging it.
That's right. Yep. And the main thing you can do to avoid that is pump it out. Every 3 to 5 years, depending on how many people you've got.
Required until every 5 years.
Is it really?
It's needed, yes.
And how do they keep track of that?
Well, they send you a notice.
And so what if you don't comply?
They'll send you another notice.
Yeah.
And then
You
you
have to
get
send in a record that you had it done?
Yeah.
Interesting.
You have
So you get fined.
to get a record back showing that it's been done, it's been done.
Okay, interesting, that's great. So the recommendation is 3 to 5 years, I like 4 years, and you're gonna hear my repeat joke from MasterCard. And this was not my joke. They recommend every 4 years, a good way to remember this is the presidential elections. Yeah, leave it at that. Well, didn't get political, it just said elections. Another important thing to remember about if you do have a septic system, don't flush old medication down there. That used to be a very common practice. Make sure you don't do that. Bring that to a pharmacy or other collection point, because those can get into the groundwater just like other stuff can. And those systems are not designed to treat that.
CVS over here has a drop.
They have a collection point, that's great. That's great.
North and Brentford to do it.
Okay. All right, so moving off of those topics like septic systems and combined sewer overflows onto cheerier things like the structures on your property. So some of the hard features, there are some simple things that you can do, very simple things that you can do. If you have a gutter downspout like this that runs onto the driveway, it goes right down into the street where there's a combined or a catch basin. Your roof and your building is directly connected to that stream wherever it may go. So a very simple fix is to go to the hardware store and change the angle on this, the elbow on that, direct it to your lawn as long as it's not coming close to your house and causing a flooding problem. This is a very simple fix to send it out into the yard. One of the easiest things you can do to help disconnect your house from that local stream. Rainwater harvesting is another thing. So this is not, as you saw with the calculation for this building, one rain barrel is not going to solve Guilford's water quality problems by putting it on your house or this building. I hate to break it to you. Everybody combined could make a difference together. Rain barrels are great because they can, in certain places where you might not have access to water for watering your vegetables or whatever, it can give you something to supplement your garden or raised beds or whatever in that area. So they can be useful in that regard, not really practical for turf but you are limited in the amount of water that you can use. So they're still useful. This one you can get on Amazon for $250. There are other local sources, which I'll show you in a second. There are diverters. This is the one I was talking with you folks about here. So if you want to fill up the barrel, you pop that down. If you want to let it continue to go down, you just slide it back up. Yep, so that's pretty slick. Gardner Supply Company is another one. So for anywhere between $100 and $300, these are some of our colleagues at Reduce Runoff. Sorry, at Save the Sound. We have this site called Reduce Runoff, and there are some local sources for rain barrels on there down in this area. Check that before here. So they may be cheaper, and often those are subsidized by some municipalities. This is the back of my house here. So I installed one of these rain barrels. I got it from Amazon because I had, definitely needed it here. I did not have any water source, and we have a lot of plants on the back patio. And I discovered these rain chains that allow that water to come down from the gutter right inside the chain. And it's really cool. Like, I know I'm a water guy, so you're thinking, is it really that cool? But my daughter, who was a teenager at the time, was fascinated when it was raining. So if a teenage girl thought this was cool, I'm telling you, it's cool. Okay? No, it's really neat to see just a nice addition, just to change and really highlight when it's raining at your property.
Is it rain or is it making noise?
No, this doesn't, but I think some of them do. I think you can get some that do have a sound feature to them also. And then we have rain gardens. So has anybody heard of these besides the master gardeners? You people? Okay. So it's just a shallow depression. It's designed to collect some stormwater runoff from some kind of impervious surface like a rooftop or parking lot. And they are generally planted with trees, shrubs, flowers that are native to this area. So here's the general idea. We have water that may come down from a downspout from a house. It comes into this depression where it will fill up in that depressed area. If there's a big rain event, we'll have a place where it can overflow. But the soil and the plants and the mulch underneath there help to process that water and let it sink into the ground, making that site function as if it were not developed, as it functioned when it was just forest here. That's really the goal of this. And it does also, well, I'll get to that. So these are just a few examples. This is a colleague, friend of mine, who put this small rain garden in at the edge of his driveway here by the edge of the street. So this is a small example. He did this in an afternoon and maybe spent $75. Here's another one getting a little larger now. This is a demonstration garden off of a gazebo here up at the Talon Agricultural Center. Seen that one? You said you lived in Talon? It's in Vernon actually, but yeah. This was the former Secretary of State who put a nice rain garden in at her house in Hartford, right near Elizabeth Park. So in Hartford, I'm sure are aware of this, Joe, many of the homes in the older neighborhoods had gutters, downspouts that came down, and the elbows went right into the house. They sent that water into the house and it was tied into the sewer line in the house. So that was pretty unique in that area. So that disconnection sent that water out to the yard and allowed it to sink in. She wanted to make an example in her community, so that's what she did there. This is one at our Norwich Extension office. So this is a little bit of a tiered setup here, so kind of a neat design. And then we have quite a few up on the main campus actually. Some students put this one in, so some nice purple cone flowers here. The vast majority of plants that are recommended for this are the ones that are native to this area, as I said. If you're plant people, you know that the purple cone flower is a prairie plant. It's not a Connecticut native, but they do very well in rain gardens. They don't spread out invasively, so we do have them on the list for Connecticut because they look so
You
nice.
want perennials rather than annuals?
Generally, you want perennials in there, exactly. And native, yep. And we have some larger ones now for some of the big buildings up on campus. And you can't put trees in those larger ones. So they really become like a mini ecosystem when you get those larger ones like that. So a lot of benefits of these. They decrease decrease surface runoff, and they're encouraging groundwater recharge. Again, to try to replicate that natural hydrologic cycle, treating pollutants, creating habitat for wildlife, and requiring less maintenance than lawns once they're established. But I always have an asterisk with this one, and I mention this to the master gardeners too when I talk about this. Many people will get excited about this, and they're gonna go to the town and say, we wanna put in a rain garden at the park, at Bittner Park, for example, which we put one in there a few years ago. So there's a good sized rain garden at Bittner Park. But if you wanted to do this at Bittner Park, and you go to the town, and you say, we wanna do this, you're gonna tell them, this is way less maintenance than grass. So it's gonna save you time. And the public works guy is gonna look at you, and he's gonna start shaking his head the other way. Because although in that little area where the rain garden is, you're not gonna have to cut that grass every week. He's gotta be there anyway, cutting the rest of the grass in that park. And now they gotta figure out what to do with this rain garden, which they've never heard of. They don't have enough people to do the work that they have already. So you're asking for them to do more than they can already handle. So if you can go into something like that, offering to help do the maintenance or help in some way, that goes a really long way with the public works folks that are often overburdened and underpaid. So I'll just give you that piece of advice. So again, the plants are native to this area. This is New York ironweed. This is one of my favorites. It does very well in rain gardens. We've got very good luck with that. This is switchgrass. So the plants are ones that are not going to be found in the middle of a wetland. So they don't like to have wet feet all the time. They can tolerate wet feet sometimes, but they also like to be dry other times. So that's an important component. I also like to get creative with labor. When we're installing rain gardens, I'm not afraid to put the kids to work. I'm not even afraid to put a girl with crutches in a cast to work. Okay? Look how happy she is. Okay? So you'll see I'm in that picture there running the show. So it's very important to select the proper site supervisor for these installations. Okay, this is usually my job. And I'm happy to deputize any of you if you'd like to do this for your installation. You must have the appropriate fruity training. All right, so we have some resources if you're interested in rain gardens on our main website, the NEMO website, nemo.uconn.edu/rain gardens. Lots of great information in here, some little short videos to guide you through the process, help you size the rain garden. The plant list is in there, all those plants are in there. And other information like soils also, the drainage class, how to find the drainage class of your soils. But just like everything these days, where it's available, if it's on the web, it's now available on your phone. We, a number of years ago, created a rain garden app. It was first built, we did this just for Connecticut, but about 5 to 6 years ago, we got a grant and expanded it to 23 other states now. So, not that it matters for you, you'll just be interested in the Connecticut one, but you can scan the QR code there. All that same information from the website is in there. There are the soils maps, some of the videos are embedded throughout. There's a sizing map that it'll zoom right into your site. You can tap out the size. You want to do this little room, for example, if there was a roof over this, it will tell you how big that area is and how big your rain garden should be to treat it. And then the plant list is in there as well. All right, just have a couple of other things for you here on permeable pavements. This is another alternative to traditional pavement that again will prevent that excess stormwater runoff. So we have things like permeable concrete. These are called PICPs, or permeable interlocking concrete pavers. There's some plastic grid pavers that I think I have a better picture of on the next slide. And these are a brick paver that have a space in there. All these things have one very important thing in common. The base that is underneath them is different from regular pavements. So if you have even a patio put in, or if you look at what's under a sidewalk or a road or parking lot, it is usually a processed gravel that has a mix of fine and coarse material in there. It packs down very well and does not let water pass through it very easily. The base under these is a coarse crushed stone that allows water to get down into the soil very quickly. So that's a very important component of these products. Here's a closer look at some of these PICPs. So you wouldn't really notice that it's any different from like a landscape paver patio. And all the water that would fall on this now sinks down through it. There's also pervious asphalt. So the parking lanes here, this is a new installation up on campus, are permeable asphalt. The center travel lane is regular asphalt. So unless you're really paying attention, you wouldn't notice the difference. It's just a little bit of a coarser mix. So it leaves the sand out. This stuff goes down with the same equipment as regular asphalt, which is a nice plus. So it's easier for the installers. And the water then that will shed off of this area will go onto here and also sink in. So it's a nice product. There's also a variety of concrete that is permeable. So you can mix this up there are some contractors that can do it in a big pour. This is trickier to do though. This is a regular concrete contractor most likely will not know what this is or how to do it. You actually have to be certified to install this. But if you, there is a company that makes these precast sections that you can buy already poured out basically. And then you can drop them right in at the site over that stone base. That's the important part. So they go right in, and there you go. You've got an instant sidewalk or parking space or whatever. This is the plastic bridge structures that I was mentioning. I was just down in DC a couple of weeks ago. I go to the Botanic Garden every time I go down there, and they have these plastic bridges that are filled with stone. Again, you can roll a wheelchair over it. It's fully wheelchair accessible, and the water passes right through it. Great product. Not great if you've got a lot of traffic, like vehicle traffic, or if you need to plow it in the winter. That's something you need to be careful. Yeah, go ahead.
For all these options you showed us, did you happen to know which ones are the least expensive?
Yes.
This is.
Yes, but you have to be careful. Like if you're just doing it for a garden area like this, that's the best and the cheapest.
Maybe for a garden area, but at least to be able to incline to that.
Okay. Yep. Yeah, but if you have to plow it in the winter, you got to be real careful with that particular variety of it.
Oh, okay.
So I've had people ask us, and actually there are people in my office. This is my colleague Dave, who needed to have his driveway paved. He's a very anxious guy. So he came in, he was all nervous about this because he's got to have his driveway paved. And this is what we're teaching the towns about, these permeable products. And so he had it priced, and he's like, I cannot afford this permeable product. This is way too expensive. So we looked at his driveway, and he said, okay, well, the road is out here. The water drains this way from the house, and goes off into his yard and the woods. None of the water from his driveway actually leaves his property. So I said to him, Dave, you can sleep easy tonight. You don't need the permeable product here. I'm not going to tell you to put it in just because. So I don't want to tell people to waste money if it's not actually having a benefit. So in this case, it didn't matter. It just, so regular asphalt was fine. There are other places where this is actually from Sarah Bailey, the former Master Gardener coordinator. She just retired. So at her house, her driveway also drains back towards the house. She wanted to do some permeable because they had a lot of issues with water against the house. There was flooding there and freezing and really causing trouble. So she priced it out for the whole driveway. It was too expensive. So she just did a small strip of it back here with an under drain that's piped around the back of the house. This has worked perfectly for her. She maintains it, sucks the sediment that accumulates in there out with a shop vac once a year, and it's fine. So these do require some maintenance. It's easy to do on a small scale like that. Larger scale for a town, you do have to hire a truck that comes in and cleans out that sediment that might have been. And look, very lastly here, obviously we know that lawns are an important part of the landscape. But some survey information from UConn shows that we mow the lawn too short, we take the clippings off, we're adding incorrect amounts or types of fertilizer, and we're not testing the soil first to make sure we actually even need to fertilize the lawn. So it's very simple things. This is like the gutter downspout elbow twist. Recycle your clippings back to the lawn. There's lots of nitrogen in there. It saves you money, and it cuts down on fertilizer losses to living waters. And test your soil. There are local resources at all of our extension offices that you can bring your soil sample in. They'll test it for you. They won't do it right there. You have to send it in. And it's not free, unfortunately, but it's not that expensive. And it will tell you if you need to fertilize at all, and if so, how much. And then if you are fertilizing, you want to make sure that you're doing this in the right way. Don't put it down when the ground is frozen or when we've got heavy rain coming. So that fertilizer would wash off the lawn and not seeking where you're using it. This is probably the one that I get most concerned about, and I'll show you that on the next slide. This is just one thing I'll mention. Organic fertilizers are also very good for the soil. They are beneficial for microbiota in the soil and can be less harmful than traditional fertilizers. But if you're thinking about the water, if you're not being careful with how you're applying them, organic fertilizers can still cause trouble downstream. Can someone name me one very common and very well used around the world organic fertilizer?
Milorganite.
That's one, but even simpler. What is milorganite?
Signature, waste.
It's human waste. It's human waste. Animal waste is the one I was going to say. It's cow manure. Animal manure, very common organic fertilizer. If cow manure is washing into the stream, it is terrible for the water in that stream. It has bacteria in it, has nutrients, cause algae blooms. It's bad. So just because it's organic doesn't mean it's better for the water. You still have to be careful with how you apply it. So this is what I get concerned about with regular fertilizer being spread. So make sure that whoever's applying the fertilizer is getting it only on the grass and not on the parking lot. Because when it gets on the parking lot like this in the next rainstorm, this was right outside my office building on campus. Next rainstorm, this all got washed down into the catch basin and right out to the stream. So that's what keeps me up. So to wrap it up for you here, protect yourself, test your drinking water if you haven't done so. To protect our local waters, take care of your septic system. Fertilize your lawn only when needed, and test the soil if you're going to do that. Leave the clippings on your lawn. Careful with how you're applying that fertilizer, and then those other structural things that we talked about too. Other resources here, this is the my Institute of Water Resources page. Pretty much everything I've talked about tonight, there are resources on here, either in the articles or the newsletters here. And one of my newsletters is over there on the table, the most recent one, along with a newsletter about well water testing. So that's also over there. There's the QR code if you'd like that. And that is all I have, and I'm happy to answer other questions, and feel free to take down my email if you'd like. Sorry. Go ahead.
What about bird food, especially in a particular area, let's say down here where the people get a lot of seabirds maybe?
So bird droppings in like
The rain or in the rain garden.
for your rain barrels. So generally unless you've got like a real population of birds like seagulls on your roof, I would definitely not use the water if it was like that heavy. You could see all the scat there. But a little bit here and there, the main thing we tell people about that is if you're going to use that water, put it on the grounds. Don't apply it to strawberries or lettuce and eat it directly without, without first of all washing it. But even still then, I wouldn't apply it directly to the plants, apply it to the soil. That's generally the recommendation.
I don't know if this applies to this conversation, but do you test for PFAS?
That's a great question. So those are the forever chemicals that we're hearing so much about. I can test for them. Right now, that test costs $215 per sample. We are trying to, we're working on a collaboration with the Department of Public Health, who actually got funding last year from EPA to do PFAS testing in public waters and private wells in the state. So we are likely going to be teaming up with them to do this in private wells in the state, in some targeted areas, and also somewhat outside of those areas. So I actually have a meeting about that next week. So that funding has been held up in this federal funding freeze issue. So that's why we don't quite know yet, but I'll know more in a couple weeks. So if you're interested in that.
I know a lot about factories that I read about, chemical factories, DuPont, as well
okay.
as folks that are creating textiles and textile waste and things like that. It's a huge problem. Now it's a legal problem for these businesses as
It
well.
is a big problem. If
But
you
I didn't
need
know
it
if that
done,
would impact like our neighborhood, if it's more like industrial.
I can tell you right now, it's everywhere.
Mhm.
And whether it's in a concentration that's high enough that's a problem for you, that we'll only find out if you do the testing. But it's in your lipstick,
Oh,
it's
it's
in
everywhere.
it's in our clothing,
Oh, yeah,
it's
it's- watch this, it's gonna come right
so,
up.
right, so, but if you do want to get your water tested in the near term, you can feel free to reach out to me and I can help you figure it out.
So this is a little bit political, may I ask?
You can ask it, I can't guarantee that I can answer, but
So you said that all the testing that goes on with the runoff to the beaches to keep
Yep.
us safe on the beaches, is this gonna be altered or compromised because of what's happening in,
so did everybody hear the question? So that will not be. So all that testing is done at the state level and is done by the Connecticut Department of Public Health. That funding comes directly from the state, so I don't believe they have any federal money that does, would impact that.
I think the only problem is if they need federal, not the state money because of cuts in other areas of the state.
That's, I mean, I would love to tell you that could never happen here, but I really can't say that for sure right now.
Yeah, but they want,
But my guess is, if I had to say, I would say that program is pretty secure.
but Washington wants all the states to pay for everything.
Which is, it's not gonna happen. That's right. Anything else? Well, I appreciate all the great questions that you've asked. It makes it fun for me when it can be interactive like this. So thank you for coming out. Hope it was worthwhile for you. And feel free to send an email if you have questions, and let me know if you'd like to set something up for the folks out there.
I want to sing praises for the agricultural extension
Yeah.
service. And I mean, when we were living up in Tallinn, we used them so much. As a matter of fact, we always called the one person was our contact there for so
This
many
is years
years, a
ago.
long time ago. That our young kids, when they were young, they're now 50, would say, "Are we related to Ed Merrick?"
because I called so much to learn. I kept
He
calling.
was such a fantastic
He was
guy. He
fun.
was everything. All his knowledge.
If you were so inclined, if you would relay that story about what you just said to me, because my boss and my boss's boss are advocating for our programs at a national level right now. So information like that, how you found extension useful, is actually helpful for us.
And now down here too.
So please send me an email if you want, and I would be really happy to hear that. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.